snow fell like white ash from a dying sky, covering the small trading outpost in a thick, cold blanket. The wind screamed through the broken gaps in the metal walls, rattling loose panels and making every sound echo into the dark. Mark Venn stood, alone beside a damaged shuttle, his gloves stiff from frost, his breath curling in the frozen air like smoke from a dying fire. Most traders had already gone inside their warm cabins hours ago. But Mark still worked, tightening the last bolts on a cracked engine mount. He liked working in the cold. It kept his mind clear, but tonight was different. The cold felt heavier, almost watchful. He heard it then, soft, uneven footsteps crunching in the snow behind him. They were too light to belong to a grown man, too careful to belong to someone drunk or careless. Mark turned slowly, his breath catching in the air. There, in the faint glow of the shuttle's work light, stood a small figure. She was no taller than his shoulder, her skin pale blue like the moonlit ice, her hair thin and silver, moving in the wind like threads of light. Her clothes were torn, patched in places with scraps of different fabrics, and her bare hands shook as if they could no longer hold on to warmth. She looked at him with wide, glowing eyes, not human eyes, and for a moment, she didn't move. Then she took a small step forward, her voice trembling. "Peeves," she whispered. "I'm so cold." Mark frowned, taking off his heavy jacket. "Here," he said, "you need this more than me." But when he held it out, she didn't take it. Instead, her eyes darted toward the shadows beyond the work light, scanning the darkness like something dangerous was out there. "Are you alone?" Mark asked, glancing into the dark as well. She didn't answer. Her lips trembled, not just from the cold. And then, instead of reaching for the jacket, she stepped closer to him. Without warning, she pressed herself against his chest, her small frame shaking violently. Mark stiffened in surprise. "Hey," he began. But she whispered quickly, "Don't push me away, please. I need to feel warm." Her skin was icy, and yet something about the way she clung to him made the cold inside him fade faster than any fire could. For a few moments, they stood there in the swirling snow, her small hands clutching his sides, as if she feared he might vanish if she let go. Mark didn't know whether to feel protective or cautious. She was clearly freezing, but there was something in her touch that felt deliberate, something that didn't seem like the way strangers usually hold each other. He finally guided her into the shelter of his repair bay, a small structure made from scrap metal and insulated panels. The heater inside hummed softly, casting a warm glow across the cramped space. She sank to the floor near the heater, curling up with her knees to her chest, but her eyes kept flicking toward the door. "Who's out there?" Mark asked quietly. She shook her head quickly. "No one you want to meet." "That doesn't answer the question," Mark said, frowning. Her gaze softened for a moment, but then she looked away. "If they find me, you'll be in danger, too," she whispered. The way she said it sent a shiver down his spine, not from the cold, but from the weight of her words. Mark sat on a crate, pulling off his gloves. "All right, so why come to me?" She hesitated, glancing at him through her long silver hair. "Because you're not like them, and because I can pay you." He raised an eyebrow. "Pay me? With what?" Her lips curved slightly, but it wasn't quite a smile, with something warmer than the fire, she said softly. Mark didn't respond immediately, his mind trying to understand what she meant. It could have been an innocent phrase, but the way she said it carried something more, something that didn't belong to a child's request. He opened his mouth to ask more, but the sudden crunch of snow outside made them both freeze. Heavy footsteps, not light like hers, came closer to the shelter. Mark reached for the wrench. By his side, his muscles tense, the girl's eyes widened, and she quickly crawled toward him, pressing close again, her voice a trembling whisper. "Don't let them see me." "Who are they?" He asked again, his voice low. Her answer was simple and urgent. Hunters. The shadow of a large figure passed by the thin slit in the metal wall, and Mark's pulse quickened. The girl clung to him tighter, her small body trembling against his. The sound of voices outside drifted through the wind, harsh. Deep tones, speaking in a language he didn't understand. They were searching for someone, and Mark already knew who. He met her glowing eyes again. And in that moment, he realized one thing. Whether he wanted to or not, he had just stepped into her fight, and the night was about to get a lot colder. The heater in the small shelter hummed faintly. But the warmth it gave off felt fragile compared to the cold pressing against the thin walls. Mark sat on the crate, still holding the heavy wrench in his hand. His eyes fixed on the metal door. The alien girl, small, pale, and shivering, crouched low near the heater, her glowing eyes darting from the door to him. Outside, the crunch of footsteps in the snow grew softer, then faded into the distance. Only then did she speak, her voice low and urgent. They won't stop looking for me. Mark studied her carefully. Who are they? She hugged her knees tighter, almost curling into herself. Hunters, she whispered. They catch people like me. And sell us. The words were simple, but they carried a sharp weight that cut into the quiet air. Mark leaned forward. Sell you? For what? She looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether he deserved the truth. Then she said, My people. We can share heat. We can make others feel safe, warm, calm. And some pay a lot to own that. Her voice trembled. Not just from the cold, but from the shame behind those words. Mark frowned, the image forming in his mind. So they want you, because I'm rare? She interrupted. Because my warmth is different, she swallowed, looking away. To them, I'm not a person. I'm just something to keep close on cold nights. Her hands shook as she spoke, and Mark could see the raw truth in her eyes. That explained why she had clung to him. Outside, not only for warmth, but because it was her way to survive. You came to me because I'm not one of them. Mark asked. Yes, she said softly. Because you look like someone who wouldn't sell me. Mark's grip on the wrench tightened slightly. You're right about that, but the girl didn't relax. Her gaze kept flicking toward the door, her body tense, as if she expected it to burst open at any second. Mark moved to check the outside through a small crack in the wall. Snow whipped past, hiding shapes in the distance. The outpost was quiet now, but he knew that wouldn't last when he turned back. She was watching him closely, her silver hair falling over her face. Why are you still here? He asked. Why not run farther away? Her answer was a soft, bitter laugh. You think I haven't tried? This planet is all ice, and I'm not built to survive long in it. She shifted closer to the heater, but even in the glow, her skin still looked pale and cold. Mark poured her a cup of hot water from the small kettle on the heater. She took it with both hands, holding it like it was the most precious thing in the world. As the steam rose, she said quietly, If you keep me here, they'll come for you too. They don't care who they hurt. I've dealt with worse, Mark replied. Though he wasn't sure why he felt the need to sound brave, the girl tilted her head, studying him. Most would have thrown me back out already. I'm not. Most people, he said, and the words came out sharper than he intended. She smiled faintly, but there was sadness in it. If you really mean to help me, you'll have to hide me somewhere safer than this. Mark was about to answer when a faint light flashed outside the crack in the wall. It moved slowly, scanning the ground a searchlight. The girl set down the cup instantly, her hands trembling. Again, they're back, she whispered. Mark's pulse quickened through the gap. He saw two tall shapes moving through the snow, their long weapons slung across their backs. One of them carried a small device that beeped every few seconds. They're tracking my heat, she said, her voice tight with fear. Mark shut off the heater at once, plunging the shelter into a colder, dimmer glow. The sudden chill bit into his skin, but he stayed quiet. The girl crawled toward him without a sound, pressing her small body against his side. It wasn't just for warmth. She was trying to merge their heat signatures so the hunters' tracker wouldn't see two separate forms. Mark could feel her heartbeat, quick and desperate. He didn't push her away. Instead, he reached for the small plasma cutter beside him. If they tried to break in, he'd make them regret it. The shadows outside grew larger as the hunters came closer. The device's beeping grew faster. Mark could hear them speaking in low, guttural tones. Though he couldn't understand the words, the girl's breathing quickened, her hands gripping his sleeve tightly. Then, just as they reached the shelter door, the beeping slowed again. The hunters paused, confused. Mark held his breath. After a tense moment, they moved away, their footsteps fading into the snowy dark. The girl finally let go of him, her shoulders dropping with relief. "You didn't have to help me," she said softly, "but you did. And that means you're in this now." Mark didn't answer immediately. He knew she was right. Whatever her past was, whatever trouble was chasing her, it had just become his trouble too, and there was no turning back. The wind outside howled like a living thing, rattling the thin metal walls of the shelter. Mark sat in the dim corner, one hand gripping his plasma cutter, the other resting near the girl who crouched beside him, her silver hair brushed against his arm as she leaned closer, still shivering though the heater was back on. She had stopped talking, her glowing eyes fixed on the door as if she could see through it. Then, the silence between the gusts was broken, heavy boots crunching through the snow. Slow and deliberate, Mark's grip tightened through the thin gap in the wall. He saw them, 3 figures, tall and broad-shouldered, their bodies wrapped in heavy black armor that gleamed faintly under the frozen moonlight. Their faces were hidden behind steel masks, each with a single red eye glowing in the center. The leader carried a long rifle with a curved blade fixed. Under the barrel, another held the same heat-tracking device from before. It's beeping fast now, the sound sharp in the still night. The girl's fingers gripped his sleeve so tightly he felt the fabric strain. "They know I'm here," she whispered, her voice almost lost under the wind. Mark's jaw tightened. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. The first knock came, not a polite knock, but a hard, booming strike that made the metal door shake. A voice followed, deep and cold, speaking in a trade language Mark understood. "Open the door, human," the voice demanded. "We are looking for stolen property." Mark didn't move. The girl's hand trembled against his arm. The voice came again, sharper this time. "You have 10 seconds. Mark glanced at the heater, then back to the door. If they forced their way in, there would be no talking his way out. He stood slowly, his boots heavy on the floor, and called out, "You've got the wrong place." A pause, then the sound of the heat tracker. Beeping even faster, the leader spoke again. "We can see the warmth inside. Let us in, or we burn you out." Mark's mind raced. If they saw her, it was over. He moved quickly, guiding the girl toward the small storage compartment at the back of the shelter. "Stay here, no sound," he whispered. She shook her head. "If they hurt you, I've handled worse," he interrupted. Forcing the door shut before she could argue, the knock came again, this time followed by the sharp hiss of something heating a plasma torch, ready to cut through. Mark didn't wait. He unlocked the door and swung it open just enough to stand in the gap, blocking their view of the inside. Cold air rushed in, stinging his skin. The leader stepped forward, the red light in his mask glaring into Mark's face. "You're shielding her," the hunter said flatly. "I don't know who you're talking about," Mark replied, his voice steady. The second hunter held up the beeping tracker. "Her heat is here." Mark's eyes flicked to the glowing device. He needed to buy time. You think every warm body is your prize. He said, maybe it's just me. Maybe it's my heater. The leader tilted his head slightly. You think lying will help you? We've been paid well to take her back. Mark didn't answer. The third hunter, silent until now, stepped forward and sniffed the air through the vents in his mask. She's here, he growled. I can smell her scent before Mark could react. The leader reached for the door, but Mark slammed his boot against it. Forcing it shut, the hunters outside growled something in their own language, the sound full of threat. We're coming in, the leader said coldly. Mark's pulse quickened. He backed away from the door and grabbed the plasma cutter, the blue light at its tip flaring to life. The hiss of the torch cutting into the metal began. Sparks rained down as the door's edge glowed orange. The girl inside the storage compartment could hear it too. Her heart pounded in her ears. Mark stood ready, every muscle tense, when the first strip of metal fell inward. The leader's hand reached through. Mark swung the cutter down hard, the flash of heat making the hunter yank back with a hiss. For a moment, there was silence again. Then the leader laughed. A low, cold sound. You have spirit, human, he said. But spirit won't save you. Mark's eyes narrowed. It saved me before. The hunter stepped back from the door, but their shadows stayed just. Outside, Mark knew this wasn't over. They would wait, watch, and strike when they thought he was weakest, inside the storage compartment. The girl pressed her hands over her mouth to stop herself from calling out to him. She knew these hunters once. They marked prey, they never stopped, and now they had marked both of them. The wind screamed louder outside, carrying with it the faint hum of the hunter's ship somewhere nearby. Mark didn't know how much longer they could hold this ground. But one thing was certain. The cold was no longer the most dangerous thing in this frozen outpost. The hunter's shadows finally faded from the crack in the door. Swallowed by the blowing snow outside, Mark didn't move for several minutes, his plasma cutter still humming softly in his hand. Only when the cold wind's howl was the only sound again did he set it down. He walked to the storage compartment and opened it slowly. The girl was crouched inside, her knees pulled to her chest, her glowing eyes wide and unblinking. They're gone, Mark said quietly. Her gaze shifted to the door, then back to him. No, they're not, she whispered. They never go away. They just wait. Mark knew she was probably right. Hunters like that didn't give up easily. He helped her out of the compartment and guided her to the heater again. Her hands were freezing. To the touch, she sat close to the warm coils, but even as the color began to return to her skin, her shoulders stayed tense. You need to tell me what's going on, Mark said. Pulling up a crate to sit across from her, she didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor, as if the words she carried were too heavy to speak. Lyra, he said, testing her name for the first time. Her head jerked up slightly, surprise flickering in her eyes. How did you said it in your sleep earlier, Mark said. That's your name, isn't it? She hesitated, then gave a small nod. Yes. Lyra. Mark leaned forward. All right, Lyra. I can't help you unless I know the truth. She drew in a shaky breath. The truth will make you wish you'd let them take me. Try me, Mark said, his tone steady. Her hands twisted in her lap, her voice dropping to a whisper. My people. We're born with something inside us, a heat that doesn't just warm, it connects. Mark frowned slightly. Connects? When we share warmth with someone, it changes them, she said. They feel safe, loved, even if they've never been loved before. It makes them want to keep us close, always. Mark's mind flashed back to when she had clung to him in the snow, how fast the cold had faded, how strangely calm he'd felt afterward. It's not just body heat, he said quietly. She shook her head. No, It's deeper than that. It's a bond. And once it starts, it's hard to break. Her eyes glistened under the heater's light. That's why people pay so much for us. Not because we're rare, but because once we touch them, they never want to let go. Mark understood now why the hunters were after her. She wasn't just valuable, she was dangerous to the wrong kind of person. They caught me 2 months ago, she continued. I was on a trade route, trying to get to the capital where my kin live. But the ship I was on sold my location. Her voice broke, but she pushed on. They took me, kept me in a cell, made me warm them at night so they could sleep without nightmares. They called me their little fire. Mark's hands curled into fists, the image burning in his mind. How did you escape? He asked. I waited until they landed on this frozen rock to refuel. Then I ran. She said, but I knew they'd follow. They always follow. The wind outside rose in a sudden gust. Making the metal walls creak, Mark glanced at the door. Then back at her. You think they'll come back tonight? She nodded slowly. If not tonight, then tomorrow or the next day. They'll hunt until they have me again. Mark leaned back slightly, studying her face. You know, you could have run past me in the snow and I wouldn't have stopped you. But you didn't. You came to me. Her eyes met his, and there was no hesitation this time, because I felt it. In the moment I saw you, I knew you weren't like them. I knew you'd try to protect me. Mark shook his head with a faint, grim smile. Or maybe you knew I was dumb enough to risk my life for a stranger for the first time. She laughed softly, a sound so warm it didn't belong in a frozen place like this. Maybe, she said, but I still think I was right, eh? Sudden loud clang on the roof made them both freeze. Mark grabbed the plasma cutter again, his eyes snapping toward the sound. They listened, heavy footsteps moving slowly overhead. Snow sliding off with each step. They've found us again, Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. Mark's eyes scanned the walls. The shelter was too small to defend for long. He turned to her. If they get in, you hide. And you don't come out until I find you. Lyra shook her head hard. No. If they take you down, they'll find me anyway. Then we don't let them take either of us, Mark said firmly. The footsteps stopped, replaced by the sound of something drilling into the roof. Lyra moved closer to him without thinking. Her small frame pressing against his arm, that same deep warmth flooded into him again. Not just chasing away the cold, but sharpening his focus. Whatever strange gift she carried, he was beginning to understand why people would kill to own it, and why he was willing to fight to keep it from them. The drilling stopped, the roof went. Silent, Mark kept his eyes on the ceiling, waiting. He didn't know what the hunter's next move would be, but he knew the night was far from over. The silence after the drilling was worse than the noise. Mark stood with his back to the heater, plasma cutter in hand, eyes scanning every shadow inside the shelter. Lyra stayed close, her silver hair brushing his arm, her glowing eyes fixed. On the roof, the wind roared outside, but through it, they could both hear faint movements. The hunters were still there, circling like predators. Then, without warning, the heater's light flickered. Mark's stomach sank. The power lines were being cut. They're going to freeze us out, he muttered. Lyra's small hands clenched at his sleeve. They'll wait until the cold makes us weak. Then they'll take me. Mark already knew that was the plan. He stepped to the heater and checked the controls, dead. The warmth in the room began to fade almost instantly. The frozen air creeping in like an invisible fog. He moved to the storage cabinet, pulling out a small backup battery unit. It would run the heater for maybe an hour, no more. He hooked it up, the coils glowing faintly again. That buys us some time, he said, though his voice was low and grim. Lyra sat down near it, rubbing her hands together. An hour isn't enough. They know exactly how long to wait. The sound outside changed, boots crunching in the snow. The beeping of the heat tracker moving closer again. Then came the metallic screech of something heavy being dragged across the ice. Mark peeked through the crack and saw them positioning a wide black crate near the front of the shelter. "What is that?" he whispered. Lyra's eyes widened in fear. "A containment cage. Once I'm inside, it will mask my heat, and no one will ever find me again." Mark's jaw tightened. This was no simple scare tactic. They were preparing to take her tonight. A hard knock slammed against the door. "Last chance, human." The leader's voice growled through the metal. "Hand her over, and we leave you breathing." Mark stayed silent. Another knock, louder this time, followed by the hiss of a plasma torch. Sparks rained down on the snow outside, their orange glow flashing through the narrow crack. Inside, Lyra moved closer to him again. Her body was still trembling, but her touch carried that deep, strange warmth that seemed to spread through his veins. "Mark," she whispered, "you don't have to do this. If you open the door now, they might let you live." He met her eyes, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not giving you to them." Her lips parted, but no words came instead. She pressed her forehead briefly to his arm in a silent thank you. The torch cut deeper into the door, the metal glowing red. Mark knew it would be minutes before they broke through. He scanned the shelter quickly. No escape hatch, no back door, just the storage compartment and a narrow vent in the roof too. Small for her to crawl through. The hunters had chosen their moment well. They were forcing him into a fight he couldn't win inside this cramped space. He made a quick decision. "We can't stay here," he said, moving toward the storage cabinet. He grabbed a thick thermal blanket and wrapped it around her. Pulling the hood low over her face, "You're going to follow me out the back wall," he said. "Stay close, stay quiet." "But there's no," she began. "There will be," he cut her off, firing up the plasma cutter again. The cutter hissed as it sliced through the metal panel at the back of the shelter. The wind rushed in instantly, icy and sharp, through the growing gap. Mark could see the dark outline of the snowdrift behind the shelter, enough cover to hide. Their movements for a few moments, the torch outside cut halfway through the front door. The leader's voice barking orders in their harsh language. Mark pushed the last piece of metal free and gestured for Lyra to go. She hesitated only a second before slipping out into the snow. Crouching low, Mark followed, pulling the blanket tighter around her small frame as they moved into the blizzard. The wind bit at his skin, but the snow was thick enough to hide their shapes behind them. The front door of the shelter finally gave way with a crash. Shouts erupted, followed by the pounding of boots as the hunters realized their prey was gone. They didn't stop. Mark led her toward the edge of the outpost, where abandoned storage tanks leaned half-buried in the snow. The wind howled between them, making it hard to hear footsteps, but he knew the hunters were coming. "They'll track us," Lyra whispered against the wind. Mark nodded. "Then we make sure we're harder to track." He led her to a narrow gap between two tanks, pulling her into the shadows. Her hands gripped his coat, her breath quick and shallow. He could feel her warmth even through the fabric, steadying his own heartbeat. "We wait here until they pass," he whispered. She nodded, her glowing eyes fixed on the swirling snow beyond their hiding place. The shouts grew louder again, the hunters sweeping the area. Mark tightened his hold on the plasma cutter. The trap had tightened, but not around her, not yet. The gap between the two storage tanks was narrow and dark. The snow swirled like white smoke. Masking their shapes from a distance, Mark crouched low beside Lyra, his breath coming out in sharp clouds, her small frame pressed against him for warmth, the blanket around her whipping in the wind. Through the snow, they could hear the hunters moving, their boots crunching on the ice. The faint beeping of the heat tracker pulsed in the storm. Sometimes close, sometimes faint. "They're sweeping the whole outpost," Mark whispered. Lyra nodded, her glowing eyes never leaving the moving shadows outside. "They won't stop," she murmured. "Not until they have me in that cage." Mark's mind raced. Staying hidden wouldn't work for long. The tracker would find them eventually. They needed distance, and fast. He glanced toward the far end of the outpost, where the icy hills rose like jagged teeth. Beyond them was the old service road that led to the cliffs. If they could make it to the cliffs, there were caves the hunter skimmers couldn't reach, but getting there meant crossing open ground. And the hunters were everywhere. Mark leaned close to Lyra, his voice low. "We're going to run." Her eyes widened. "Through them." He nodded. "Through them. But the storm is our cover." A sudden burst of wind swept across the tanks, nearly knocking them over. Mark took it as their chance. "Now," he whispered. Grabbing her hand, they moved fast, boots sinking into the deep snow. The blizzard whipped around them, erasing their tracks almost as soon as they made them. Shouts erupted to their left. One of the hunters had spotted movement. A shot of blue plasma sizzled past, melting snow into steam where it hit. "Keep running." Mark yelled over the wind. Lyra's grip tightened on his hand, her short legs struggling to keep up. Another shot cut the air, closer this time. Mark veered sharply toward a collapsed supply shed, using its rusted frame as cover. The hunters? Shadows moved through the snow, red eyes glowing faintly in the storm. They were splitting up, trying to surround them. Mark's heart pounded. They couldn't get trapped here. He pulled Lyra toward the right, away from the lights of the outpost, deeper into the swirling white. The wind grew stronger the farther they ran, the snow stinging their faces. Mark could barely see the ground ahead, but he kept moving. Lyra stumbled once, and he caught her. Her body was shaking harder now, not just from fear, but from the brutal cold. Without thinking, she pressed closer to him as they ran, her warmth seeping through his coat. That strange, calming heat filled his chest, dulling the ache in his legs and pushing him forward. Behind them, the hunters shouted in their harsh language, the beeping tracker still chasing their heat signature. Mark spotted a low ridge ahead, the wind whipping snow over its edge. "Up there." He called. They scrambled up, the snow deep around their boots. At the top, Mark looked back. 3 dark shapes moved below, weapons raised. He pulled Lyra down the far side, sliding part of the way. The snowbank at the bottom swallowed them. In a soft crash, for a moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Mark pushed himself up, helping Lyra to her feet. "We're close," he said, pointing toward the jagged cliffs in the distance. Lyra looked up at him, her voice small but steady. "You're risking everything for me." He met her gaze, his breath heavy in the frozen air. "Some things are worth the risk." They pressed on, weaving between ice formations as the storm raged. The cliffs loomed larger with every step, dark openings visible near their base, but the hunters were still behind them, closer now. The trackers' beeping grew faster. A shot of plasma exploded against the ice near their heads, showering them with shards. Mark yanked her into a narrow crevice. They squeezed through, the ice walls scraping their shoulders. On the other side, the path sloped down toward the largest cave, its mouth black against the snow. They were almost there when a shadow dropped into their path. The leader, tall, armored, rifle raised. His red eye glowed like a burning coal in the storm. Lyra froze, her hand tightening around Mark's. The leader's voice cut through the wind. "It's over, human. Hand her to me." Mark stepped in front of her, his plasma cutter sparking to life. "Come take her," he said, his voice low and steady. The leader's head tilted, a slow, mocking gesture. "You think you can fight me in this storm?" Mark didn't answer. He lunged, swinging the cutter toward the rifle. Sparks flew as the leader blocked it with the blade under the barrel. Lyra darted to the side, breaking free from Mark's grip. The leader turned toward her instantly. And that was his mistake. Mark slammed the cutter into the rifle's grip, Melting the metal in a burst of blue light, the weapon fell into the snow, hissing. Mark grabbed Lyra and pushed her toward the cave. They ran, the wind and snow swallowing the hunters' curses behind them. The cave swallowed them in darkness and silence. The air inside was still, almost warm compared to the storm outside. Mark led her deeper until the sound of the wind faded. Only then did they stop. Breathing hard, Lyra leaned against him, her glowing eyes soft in the shadows. "You didn't let go," she whispered. "Wasn't planning to," Mark replied, but outside, faint in the storm, the hunters' voices still echoed. The escape wasn't over. It had only bought them time. The cave was quiet except for the soft dripping of melting ice. Mark leaned against the rough wall, his breath slowing as the storm's howl faded outside. Lyra sat beside him, her blanket wrapped tightly around her small frame. Her glowing eyes fixed on the faint light from the cave mouth for the first time since they had met. Her hands weren't trembling. The warmth between them now came not just from her strange gift, but from something unspoken trust. Mark finally broke the silence. "We can't stay here forever." Lyra nodded, her voice low. "I know. But here, they can't track me as easily. The rock blocks my heat. That'll give us some time," Mark said. "But they'll wait." She looked down at her hands, the faint blue of her skin seeming softer in the darkness. They always wait for a long moment. Neither of them spoke. Then Lyra glanced at him, her voice hesitant. "Why did you help me, Mark?" "You didn't even know me," Mark thought about it. The memory of her shivering in the snow flashing in his mind. "Because you looked at me like I was the last safe place left in the galaxy," he said simply. Her lips curved in a small, fragile smile. "And you didn't ask for anything back." "That's not how this works," Mark replied. "You help someone because it's the right thing, not because you want something." Lyra shifted closer, her shoulder brushing against his arm. "When you touched me out there in the snow," she said softly, "you didn't know what it meant for my kind." Mark glanced at her. "You told me later," she nodded. "Sharing warmth isn't casual for us. It's how bonds are formed, how we choose who we trust with our lives." Her voice dropped even lower. "And once it's shared more than once, it's a bond for life." Mark felt the weight of her words sink in. "So what you're saying is, we're stuck with each other." Her smile widened slightly. "That's one way to put it." Outside, the wind carried faint echoes of the hunters' voices, but they were distant now. Lyra's small hand found his, her fingers cold at first, then slowly warming in his grasp. "We'll have to move before dawn," Mark said. "The storm will slow them tonight, but they'll search the cliffs. When the light comes, where will we go?" She asked. "There's an old mining station 2 days from here." He said, "It's abandoned, but the tunnels go deep. Deep enough that no heat tracker will work." Her eyes lit with a mix of hope and worry. That far and this cold. He smirked faintly. "You keep me warm, I'll keep you alive." Her cheeks colored faintly. But she didn't look away. "Then we'll make it." Hours passed in the dark, the cave's stillness wrapping around them like a shield. Mark dozed, lightly waking at every sound. Lyra stayed close, her breathing even, her warmth steady against his side. For her, this was the first time in weeks she had slept without fear of a door opening or a hand dragging her away. When the faint blue of pre-dawn seeped into the cave, Mark was already awake. He nudged her gently. "Time to move," she stirred, pulling the blanket tighter before standing. Outside, the storm had calmed, leaving a smooth white sheet over the land. It was beautiful. But Mark knew it was dangerous. Their tracks would be clear, and the hunters would know they were on the move. They left the cave, moving quickly toward the hills. Lyra's steps were small, but steady, her breath curling in the cold. Mark kept scanning the horizon, the memory of the hunter's glowing red eyes still fresh in his mind. Every sound of shifting snow or cracking ice made him tighten his grip on the cutter. By midday, they had crossed into the open flats. Lyra's pace slowed, but she didn't complain. The mining station was still far, but Mark could already picture the safety of its tunnels. And for the first time since this started, he began to believe they might actually make it. Then, in the distance, a shape appeared, tall, dark, moving against the white. Mark's pulse jumped. Another shape followed, then another. The hunters had found them again. Lyra looked up at him. Fear flashing in her glowing eyes, Mark took her hand. "We keep going." "No matter what," she nodded, squeezing his hand. No matter what, they moved faster. Their boots kicking up powdery snow. The hunters shouted, their voices carrying on the wind. But this time, Mark didn't feel that cold grip of fear in his chest, not with Lyra beside him, because somewhere between the shivering girl in the snow and the night in the cave, she had stopped being just someone to protect and had become someone worth everything. As the mining station's shadow finally came into view against the horizon, Mark knew the fight wasn't over. But he also knew this: the bond they had forged in the frozen dark would outlast the storm. And as long as that bond held, no hunter in the galaxy would ever truly catch her again.